Have you ever heard of a man being saved by a Bigfoot? In the dead of winter, 1991, temperatures dropped to 30. Somewhere deep in the Minnesota wilderness, a ranger named Orin Maddox, grieving the loss of his wife and child, heard a cry for help in the blizzard. What he found would change everything. A baby Bigfoot, trapped and frostbitten. Its mother, ensnared in steel cables. And Orin, a man with nothing left to lose, made a choice to save them. Days later, that very creature returned the favor, when Orin's life was on the line. This isn't a legend. It's a true story, recorded in the final journal of a ranger who spent 30 years in the harshest forests of Minnesota. In the next 5 minutes, you'll discover how a man touched the heart of a mythical beast, the secret sign Bigfoot used to show its gratitude, and the chilling moment when a single growl in a snowstorm saved a life. Orin lost everything, but in saving that creature, he found something else. A quiet bond, forged in snow, sealed with a fir branch planted upside down, an ancient symbol of trust. Watch till the end, because if you skip this, you'll never know. Do Bigfoot exist? And if they do they feel mercy? The wind hit like fists, hard, constant. It howled through the trees like something searching for a name. Orin Maddox hunched forward, one hand shielding his eyes, the other gripping his walking staff as he moved slow and steady across the white expanse of Gunflint Trail. The snowshoes strapped to his boots crunched rhythmically beneath him, their prints already being erased by the driving snow. Visibility? Maybe 20 feet, if that. Everything else had turned into a swirling wall of white. He'd seen storms, lived through worse, but something about this one felt personal. The cold clawed under his coat, reached through his gloves like it remembered him. It knew where to hurt. Then it came, a sound that didn't belong to any storm, a scream, not a human one. Sharp, rasping, dragged out from the throat of something in agony. He stopped, breath held, heart paused, his ears strained against the roar of the wind. There it was again, a wail, long, thin, threaded with desperation, rising from somewhere below. He turned off the trail. The slope dropped sharply toward the riverbed, half frozen, split by patches of exposed rock and banks of snow-covered sand. As he made his way down, the snow softened underfoot, thickening with each step. Then, near a narrow bend in the river, the ground suddenly gave way to a wide flat of exposed sand, and in the middle of it, a hole. He saw the edges first. Too clean, too sharp, not a natural sink. Someone had dug it. Orin knelt slowly, brushing the snow off the rim. He felt the shovel marks with his gloved fingers. Straight lines, smooth curves, edges tamped down hard. Then he looked down into the trap. It was a pit, a deep one. 6, maybe 7 feet, straight-walled, sides slick with frozen dirt and ice. And at the bottom, half buried in slush and pine needles, lay a creature. Curled, shaking, a child, not human. Its body was covered in dense, frost-rimmed fur, the color of dead leaves soaked in snowmelt. Limbs long and wrong. One arm twisted awkwardly under its chest, like it had fallen hard. Around its fingers he saw the red, blood staining the snow beneath sharp blackened nails. It had tried to climb, tried to scratch its way out. The walls showed the streaks, claw marks, then handprints, then smears. Its breath came in gasps. Barely there, plumes of white that barely rose. He dropped to his knees. One hand pressed against the frozen lip of the trap. The other reached into his pack. But something stopped him. Not a noise, a feeling. He turned his head slowly. Across the sandbar, beyond a thin crust of ice bridging the river, tangled in a mess of steel cables and fraying netting, lay something massive. The body was half submerged in snow, a collapsed form slumped against a leaning pine, a shoulder black and slick with ice, a face or the memory of one, barely visible between the tangles of hair. One arm stretched out and caught in a metal loop, twisted unnaturally, socket likely blown. A steel hook bit into her shoulder. Her chest barely rose, but her eyes, he saw them, locked on the pit. She wasn't dead. Not yet. She watched the child, watched without blinking, and Orin understood. Mother? His chest tightened. Not from fear, from something deeper, something old, something that hadn't moved in years. His hand went to the wooden charm tied to his snowshoe, a tiny carved symbol, smooth from time and touch. He slipped it into his palm and closed his eyes. The cold pressed in around him, but he let it. He stayed kneeling by the pit, the frozen wind stinging his face, snow melting against his beard, whispering a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Eliza. He pressed his hand to the ice. Just for a moment. A silent prayer. Not for himself. Not anymore. A sudden gust tore through the trees, rattling branches like bones. But beneath it, from far upriver, he heard something worse than the wind. The low growl of an engine, a snowmobile, then another. Closer than they should be. He looked down at the creature in the pit, its breath now barely rising. Then back toward the motionless shape of the mother, her arm still bound in cable, her shoulder bleeding onto the snow. Time was out. He reached for the rope in his pack. The sound of the engine rolled closer, low and rising like something ancient waking beneath the ice. Orin didn't look back. He couldn't. Not yet. The child was slipping away, breath shallower than before, curls of steam barely rising from its fur. He moved fast now, hands steady despite the sting. The old calluses on his palms cracked open again from cold and urgency. He tore off the pack, fingers fumbling through the canvas until he felt the familiar textures. Rope, carabiner, pulley, everything in its place from years of habit, even if he hadn't used them in ages. He'd never thought he'd use them for this. The first throw missed. The hook clanged against the opposite wall of the pit and bounced down into the snow beside the creature. It didn't flinch. He cursed under his breath fogging. The second throw caught for half a second, then slipped, the ice shearing it free. He could feel the pressure behind him growing, that mechanical snarl, now with the whine of a second machine joining. They were coming, fast. They knew this place. He didn't breathe for the third throw. This time it caught. Orin anchored his boot, wedged the pulley against a wedge of frozen soil, and started to pull. Slowly, carefully. The child's body rose inch by inch, limp, arms dangling like sapling branches in ice. One foot dragged across the wall, caught briefly, then slid free. He braced with his whole body, gritting through the bite in his shoulder, his knees protesting as he shifted weight. And then, the creature was over the rim. He dropped beside it, unfastened his coat without hesitation and wrapped it around the creature's narrow chest. The fur was stiff, soaked through, its warmth seeping away fast. He reached for the emergency thermal blanket, ripped open the seal with his teeth, and covered the child in the silver sheet, tucking the edges in against the wind. No fire. That would draw attention. He knew that. Passive warming, shared heat. He pulled the creature against his side, arm tight around its small back, his body doing what the fire couldn't. He didn't speak, didn't name it. But he thought of names, ones he'd once saved, ones he'd buried. The breath under his arm was still faint, but steady now. He glanced toward the trees. There was no saving the mother. Not yet, not in this wind. But he'd come back for her. He reached up, packed the edge of the trap with snow, smoothed the rim. Then he scooped the child in both arms, rose to his feet, staggered once in the wind but stayed upright. Behind a rise of frozen brush, there was a small drift, thick enough to shield them from view. He knelt, laid the creature down gently behind the drift, double-wrapped it in his outer coat, then pushed snow over the top of the silver blanket to mask the shine. One final glance at its face, Pale skin under the fur, closed eyes, cracked lips. And then he turned. The metal was already gleaming with frost when he reached her. Her eyes found him again, unchanged, unblinking. Her breath came ragged now, visible in gusts that staggered out of her like dying wind. One of her arms was bound with multiple loops of steel cord, tightened through a locking carabiner and cinched against a thick mesh net. It wasn't random. This was designed. Someone knew what they were catching. The first lock clicked open with a groan. He had to punch the ice off the release. The second resisted. He banged his knuckles against a rock trying to lever it free, felt the blood spill into his glove and ignored it. When it finally snapped, she flinched, just once. Her whole shoulder spasmed like a coil that had been held too tight. He paused. Their eyes met again. She didn't attack, didn't growl, just looked. He felt something shift in his chest. Not pity, something older. Recognition. The final lock was different. A twisted cam lock, jammed from impact. No way to unclip it. He pressed one knee into the snow, pulled out the multi-tool from his hip pouch, and set the knife edge into the metal seam. Hands trembling now. Not from fear. From cold and adrenaline and memory. His fingers tightened around the bua charm tied to the lace of his left snowshoe, thumb rubbing the curve of the carved wood smooth. It had been Eliza's. Once. He whispered something under his breath. Not a word. More like a vow. This wouldn't happen again. Not on his watch. The blade bit, slipped, caught. The wind rose. A snap behind him. A branch breaking. The sound of machines now within reach, just up the ridge. Closer than he thought. Probably half a minute, maybe less. He shifted grip, jammed the blade again. The metal cracked. The lock split open. The net slumped. For a second, nothing happened. Just the storm. Just the forest. Just the heartbeat in his throat. Then she moved. Not fast, just upward. Her height unfolded like a tree being pulled from the earth. All shadow and fur and blood-slicked muscle. She didn't roar. Not yet. But the sound that came from her chest was low, so low it vibrated through the ground beneath Orin's knees. A warning. A tremor. The forest listened. Then came the second sound. Tree branches above them broke under the weight of collected snow. Bombs of white falling in waves. They landed like thunder, one after another, around the clearing. Orin's breath caught in his throat. Even the storm seemed to pull back, and that's when he heard them. Voices, angry, then sharp. The hell! Then silence. He turned his head just enough to see. Figures in white parkas, stumbling through the snow with rifles drawn. Brock at the front, red-faced, spit clinging to his beard, boots sinking deep as he skidded to a stop. His eyes landed on the empty trap. He looked up and saw her. She didn't move, didn't chase. She just stood. And the forest moved around her. The sound of breaking branches, the hiss of wind dragging through pine needles, the heavy silence of things watching. Brock raised his rifle. Orin didn't speak, didn't move, his body frozen, not from fear, but reverence. Then the scream came. Not hers. One of the younger ones, dropping his gun and turning. Another followed. Brock shouted something, but it was swallowed by the trees. They fled in panic, boots slipping, packs tearing, gear abandoned. She turned, walked past Orin without a word. In her arms, she cradled her child. He didn't know when she'd picked it up. Only that it was wrapped now. Not in fur or net, but in his thermal blanket. Her head bowed low over it, shielding its face from the wind with her shoulder. Her pace slow, heavy, like someone carrying the weight of two worlds. And then she paused, only for a breath. She reached to her side and took something from the tangle of her hair, a small branch of spruce. She turned it in her long fingers once, then knelt and pressed it gently into the snow at his feet, upside down. A marker, a message. Then she was gone, swallowed by the trees. Orin stayed kneeling, his heart thundered in his chest. And behind him, Up on the ridge, the growl of engines was still growing louder. The first boot broke the snow crust hard enough to crack the silence wide open. Brock came barreling down the slope, gun drawn, parka swinging open at the sides like wings of a crow, dive-bombing a kill. His breath fogged up in bursts as he shouted back to the men behind him. They stumbled into view seconds later, dragging gear, eyes darting, boots slipping on the edge of panic. And then he saw it. The pit. Empty. He stopped cold. The trap was clean. Rim smoothed. Nothing inside. Only the faint shape of something heavy having once been there, now replaced by disturbed snow and the wet glint of blood that hadn't yet frozen. Brock's face twisted, mouth curling like it had smelled something foul. His voice cracked through the storm, loud enough to startle a raven from a nearby pine. Somebody's been here. His eyes swept the tree line. Then the river. He was right. Orin could hear him. Every word. He was crouched farther off than they realized, just out of sight behind a fallen spruce half buried in snow. His breathing shallow. One hand still pressed to the broken carabiner he hadn't bothered to pocket, the metal biting cold through his glove. He knew the storm was doing him a favor. Whiteout conditions had moved in like a curtain. He could barely see 20 feet ahead, and neither could they. Sound, though, still traveled. And so did memory. He could hear the gear shifting in Brock's hands, the slam of a snowmobile hood being thrown open. Metal on metal, curses under breath, frustration, the kind that turns to danger when mixed with fear. Orin pressed lower, eyes narrowing. They wouldn't leave empty-handed. Men like that never did. The voice came sharp again. "Tice! Ren! Fan out! Something's not right!" Boots stomped. Branches cracked. Snow shifted under too many feet. Orin's fingers found the ridge of the spruce charm in his coat pocket. He closed his hand around it. He didn't have time. He moved, quick but careful, pulling back from the log and deeper into the woods. The wind was working in his favor now, blowing hard from the north, covering his tracks and swallowing the noise of his movement. Every few yards, he paused to listen. They were splitting up, just as Brock had ordered. Voices drifting apart. Radio static. A curse about visibility. Someone complained their scope had iced over, but Orin wasn't going to outrun them. Not like this. He needed to lead them. He glanced up. The slope narrowed ahead, an old river cut, where wind funneled snow into deep drifts. Years ago, it had nearly taken a moose clean under during melt season. The banks were crusted now, rimmed with brittle pine and high snow-laden limbs. He turned toward it and started walking. Not fast, just steady. He left prints where they'd be seen. The snow cracked behind him moments later. Not wind, not chance, pursuit. Orin didn't look back. He led them into the choke point, boots carving a trail that could not be missed. Snow thickened as he moved. The wind shifted again, now a headwind, slicing through fabric and memory. He pushed on. The woods grew tighter, shadows thicker. The path narrowed to little more than a game trail. Then he stopped. His legs shook, not from fear, but because he knew what was coming. Brock's voice came first, too close. "There! You see him?" Orin didn't answer. He turned. The men emerged from the wall of snow, one after the other, rifles up. Brock was breathing hard. His beard rimed in frost, eyes sharp with that particular brand of cruelty that comes from entitlement and rage. He didn't shout this time. He didn't need to. He stepped closer, pulled a coil of paracord from his belt. Orin didn't resist. He let them knock him down, tie his wrists, slam his shoulder into the trunk of a fir. He didn't speak even when Tice kicked the compass from his belt and sent it skidding into a drift. "What did you see?" Brock's voice was low now, close. "Where is it?" Orin didn't blink, so they started walking again. They shoved him forward through the storm, tied like livestock between them. They made him walk across ice and jagged stone, across ridges slick with frost. His knees buckled more than once. No one helped him up. "You gonna lead us to it?" Brock said. Or are we gonna make something real bad happen? He didn't answer. They moved into a corridor of trees, old pines, trunks like pillars. The snow here was strange, like a roof had been draped above them. Heavy mounds clung to the high branches, unmoved by the storm, waiting. The silence was absolute. Orin's eye caught it first. Just ahead, in the drift beside a dead stump, the same shape he'd placed days ago, a spruce branch, stuck upside down in the snow. Still there, undisturbed, still sending its message. He looked up. High above, the branches were sagging, fat with snow. Too fat. A single sound could bring it all down. He stumbled on purpose, went to one knee, felt the cord bite deeper into his wrist. Tice growled. "Get up!" He didn't. So Tice pulled a knife, held it flat under Orin's chin. "You think we won't?" Orin didn't move, didn't even blink. The air shifted. It was slight, barely a tremor. But it was real. Then the sound. Low, bone deep. It rose from the tree line like a memory waking. A growl, not loud, but huge. Not human. The trees went silent again. Then one of them cracked. A branch high above snapped under its own weight and dumped snow in a white wall, right between the men and the voice. Panic set in fast. Wren screamed first. Then Brock cursed and stumbled back. Tice's grip faltered just long enough for Orin to twist his wrists, snow helping him slip loose from the cord. He dropped, rolled, came up gasping, the cold punching the air out of his lungs. He looked behind him. Nothing visible yet, just trees. But it was there. He knew it. They all did. The second growl came louder, closer. Something heavy was moving through the forest now, too fast to track, too large to ignore. Another branch dumped its weight, then another. The trees exploded in snow, like they were purging the storm themselves. Wren bolted. The others followed. Brock shouted after them, but no one listened anymore. They ran, and behind them, the woods swallowed everything. Orin stood barely. His wrists were cut, his compass gone, his legs unsteady. But he was alive. He turned back toward the trees. Behind him, something huge stepped between the trunks. He didn't flinch. She looked down at him, breath steaming in slow clouds. She said nothing, did nothing. But in her stillness, the storm itself seemed to pause. He knelt without thinking, and waited, not in fear, in awe. Snow had a way of covering things, but not hiding them. Not really. It softened edges, filled in boot prints, buried broken branches. But the memory of what had happened out there stayed sharp under the surface, just like glass under fresh powder. And Orin felt every shard of it. He'd returned to the cabin without speaking, without resting, his wrists raw, his shoulder throbbing where the rope had bruised him deep, and his boots soaked through. But what stuck with him wasn't the pain. It was the sound of her walking away, the weight of the spruce branch she left behind, the way it pierced the snow with quiet intention, upside down like a prayer reversed. In the days that followed, the storm broke, but the silence stayed. Gunflint Trail turned into a white corridor again, and his patrol resumed as if nothing had happened, as if the woods hadn't shifted in front of him, as if a promise hadn't been carved into the snow. But he knew better. The trail was colder now, not just in temperature, but in tone. Quieter. Off. It started with the prints. At first, he thought they were his, just a double back from a previous walk, maybe when the light was low or the wind high. But then he noticed the gaps were wrong, the stride too long, the edges too fresh. And the kicker, there were always two sets, parallel. One unmistakably from snowshoes, the other from boots. Lighter, narrower. Someone was walking where he walked, matching him step for step, but never ahead. He tried not to draw conclusions too fast. There were other rangers, occasionally poachers, survey teams, hikers that wandered too deep. But none of them would have shadowed the trail like that. None of them would have avoided the cameras. None of them would have tapped 3 times against his cabin window and vanished before he could reach the door. That happened the third night. He'd just finished sharpening the old hatchet, more out of habit than need. when it came. 3 slow taps. Even. Precise. Not hard enough to crack the glass. Not soft enough to be wind. They echoed in the still air like punctuation. He swung the door open, flashlight already in hand, beam cutting through the trees. But the porch was empty. No prints on the step, no sound. Just the forest, watching back. He didn't report it. Not officially. He knew how it'd look, how it'd sound. Instead, he pulled the old paper maps from the drawer. The ones with creases like fault lines and coffee stains in the corners. He flattened them across the table, lit the lantern low, and began to mark. Not just the trap site, all of them. Every false mound, every broken twig he'd found near a snowbank, too clean to be random. He circled the ridge with the hanging corridor of trees, drew a notch where he'd seen the branch, added a note about the horseshoe cliff and the twin spruce that leaned toward each other like old friends. By the 4th day, he noticed the kettle he'd left cooling by the trailhead was gone. He hadn't told anyone about it, hadn't meant it as bait. Just a warm offering. A habit from another life, when people dropped coffee off on porches instead of fists. But now it was gone. Not taken violently, not smashed, just no longer there. He left another the next day, this time with a tea bag and a small strip of flannel wrapped around the handle for warmth. The next morning the kettle was there, but the tea bag was missing. In its place, tucked inside the mouth, was a piece of bark, folded lengthwise with a single pine needle pressed between. No one he knew left messages like that. So he left one back. He carried a spruce branch all the way from the ridge, turned it upside down, planted it gently near the edge of the clearing. A sign, a line, not a challenge, not a threat, just a mark of respect. He didn't stay to watch what happened to it. That wasn't the point. That night, as the wind curled down from the hills and frost claimed the edges of the windows, he lit the single candle on the shelf above the fireplace. It sat beside the only photo he still kept in the open. Eliza, holding their son when he was no bigger than a loaf of bread, the dog already asleep at their feet. He spoke quietly then. If someone had been there for him, would it have changed anything? No one answered, but he wasn't asking for answers. He just wanted the woods to hear. Just past 3 a.m., the sky began to pulse pale. Not light, not dawn, something older. Winter breath curling against black glass. And then he saw them. 4 figures, moving out of the tree line like shadows had grown legs. Human, mostly. Brock was up front. Orin knew that walk. The heavy, leaning shuffle of someone whose pride outpaced his stamina. Behind him came Tice and Wren, flanking a 4th man Orin didn't recognize. Taller, leaner, carrying a radio like a 3rd arm. None of them smiled. Not that kind of visit. They didn't knock. Didn't need to. Orin stood by the table, hands loose at his sides, heart like a drum underwater. He watched as Brock stepped into the candlelight, eyes sweeping the cabin like he owned it. Saw the kettle, the maps, the red marks. Then he smiled. Tight. Cold. You've been busy, Maddox. Orin didn't answer. He didn't have to. Brock's smile widened just a hair. Let's take a walk. The first punch didn't bleed, but it rang deep. A knuckle-driven jab straight to the temple, not to knock him out, just to disorient. The kind that makes the world tilt sideways. Brock knew what he was doing. Orin staggered to the side, caught himself on the doorframe, but didn't fall. Brock grabbed his collar and shoved him out the cabin into the snow. Tice followed right behind, tying the paracord with cold precision, muttering something about old men and long walks. The 3rd man didn't speak, just stood near the snowmobiles with the engine still humming, radio clipped to his vest, scanning the ridge with eyes that never blinked. The wind wasn't sharp yet. That would come later. Right now it had the weight of warning. They didn't wait for coats or gear. Didn't give him time to lace up properly. Just marched him forward through the trees. Snow clumped around the cuffs of his pants. His compass was gone. He'd seen Tice kick it into the drift on his way out, watched it spin like a broken tooth before the powder swallowed it whole. "You're gonna show us where you saw it," Brock said, pushing him in the back. "Or we'll find out the hard way what else you're hiding." Orin didn't answer. No reason to. They didn't want truth. They wanted control. They veered off the trail within 100 yards. The storm hadn't come back yet, but the sky was pregnant with it. Every shadow looked like it was holding its breath. The ridge narrowed quick, thick with pines, jagged rock under snow, branches heavy above. He could feel them watching him, not just the men, the trees, the cold, whatever had moved in these woods long before him. He walked slowly, letting his feet find the path. Not to stall, to listen. Every so often, Brock would shove him again, hard, like violence could make the wind speak faster. Tice stayed quiet, knife still at his hip, fingers twitching toward it every time Orin slowed. Eventually they reached the mouth of the cut, an old game path chiseled between two outcrops. Narrow, icy, familiar. He'd been here days ago. This was where he left the spruce marker, and it was still there, half buried, frost-tipped but upright, pressed into the drift like someone had come after and replanted it deeper, not disturbed, not ignored, not forgotten. Brock didn't notice it. None of them did. They were too focused on him and the route ahead. "This where it was?" Brock asked, circling in front of him. "This where you saw that thing?" Orin looked past him, toward the line of trees ahead. A corridor of silence. The place where the wind never quite whistled right, where the snow hung above like a trap waiting to be tripped. "You don't want to go in there," he said softly. Brock grabbed his coat and yanked him close. "You don't get to make threats." "It's not a threat." Tice stepped forward now, pulled the knife out halfway, just enough for the metal to sing against the sheath. "You think we're playing?" Orin didn't flinch. So Tice reached out and touched the edge of the blade to his cheek, then traced it downward, toward the corner of his mouth. "Open wide, Grandpa." Brock laughed behind him. Wren said nothing. The blade touched skin. Orin's legs didn't move, but something inside him shifted. A tight coil wound years ago, buried under guilt and frost, now tightening. Not with fear, but clarity. He looked left. There it was. The spruce branch, still reversed. Then he looked up. The snow above had gathered thick. No wind had come strong enough to dislodge it yet. It sat like a breath held in a throat too full. He took a half step forward, let his foot slide, let himself fall. Tice's blade missed his skin by a hair as he stumbled sideways into the drift, shoulder catching a dead log, breath bursting from his lungs like steam. The branch cracked. High above, no one reacted in time. The tree bomb dropped in silence before it struck. A wall of white slammed down from the canopy, shattering across the path, powder exploding in every direction. Brock screamed. Tice vanished in snow. Wren cursed and stumbled back, rifle lifting reflexively. Then came the sound. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. It rose from the woods like the groan of the mountain itself, low and endless, full of the weight of things forgotten. The growl hit the marrow. Brock turned, gun out, eyes wide now, no longer full of bravado, just raw fear. "What the hell was that?" Another growl. Closer. This one cracked the ice beneath Orin's knees. A vibration, more than a sound, felt through bones, through lungs, through the part of you that still remembers childhood stories about what lives in the woods. Then silence again, for 1 second. Then branches broke. Not snow this time, wood. Thick limbs. Something moving between them, not away, but toward. Wren bolted. He dropped his pack and ran. Tice crawled to his feet, face bleeding from the blast of snow, and backed up without looking. Brock stood frozen. Orin pulled himself upright. The ropes had loosened in the fall. He shrugged one off. Then the trees opened. She stepped into view like a memory made flesh, tall as shadow, shoulders rising like boulders, breath white and steaming like coal smoke. The Northern Mother. She didn't roar. She didn't chase. She just stood there, and the forest shifted around her. She looked at Brock, at Tice, then at Orin. Her eyes held his like they remembered him from before language, before fire, before fences. Then her head tilted. Slight, measuring, snow swirled in between. No one moved. Then Brock screamed. Not a word, not a command, just pure fear. He ran. So did Tice. Their boots slipped on the path they'd carved themselves. Orin didn't move. He met her gaze, and she came forward, slow, silent, each step pressing into the snow without sound. She reached him. He stood still, hands by his side. She reached out, not clawed, not violent, and bent low. The ropes around his wrists were still tangled. She didn't rip them. She leaned in and bit. Teeth slid under the cord with surgical care. One twist. It split. Didn't touch skin. Didn't draw blood. Orin looked at her stunned, and she breathed. Just that. Their breath curled in the air together. One cloud. Shared. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But the message passed between them anyway. A sound behind her broke the stillness. The low hum of a snowmobile engine struggling to turn over. Far. Fading. He looked past her. Toward the tree line. But she was already turning. Already moving back into the woods. No blood, no bodies. Just fear left behind, and that was enough. Orin stayed still. Hands tingling with new warmth. Snow melting down his collar. Heartbeat thudding like a war drum. And in the distance, the forest exhaled again. But this time it wasn't angry. It sounded almost patient. The trees didn't move, but everything around them did. The air changed first, denser, quieter. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums until they ring. Orin stood halfway between memory and adrenaline. His wrists still raw from the rope she'd bitten through, steam curling from the frayed ends where her teeth had severed the tension like it was nothing. The snow clung to his jacket in patches, melting into his collar, but he didn't feel the cold. Not the kind that stings skin. This was deeper. It moved under bone. She hadn't left. Not fully. The northern mother stood just a few yards off now, halfway between him and the deeper stretch of forest. Her body blocked the wind like a mountain. She didn't posture, didn't snarl. She just stood, like a gate, like something ancient that had always been there, waiting for the moment someone would understand it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Behind Orin, the others had scattered. Wren had disappeared completely. Tice had taken off toward the lower ridge, boots carving erratic lines through the snow as if his legs couldn't decide which way was safer, away from her or toward the machine he'd left running. But Brock had frozen in place, knees half bent, rifle half raised, half lowered, like his body couldn't decide what the hell it believed anymore. His lips moved, not speaking, just forming silent arguments with the part of his brain that refused to believe what his eyes were seeing. He wasn't shouting anymore. No more barking orders or forcing his weight around like a badge. Just him and the growing weight of reality sinking into his chest. Then he fired. One panicked shot, a knee-jerk pull of the trigger that cracked like a firecracker in the stillness. The bullet didn't hit her. Didn't even come close. It hit a branch above her, slicing through the snowpack and triggering a fall of powder that puffed down in a harmless cloud. She didn't react. Didn't flinch. Just tilted her head slightly, as if considering him now in a new light. Something lesser. Something broken. The second growl didn't come from her. It came from deeper in the woods. Lower. Rougher. Like gravel being stirred underwater. It came with a rustle of movement. A shift in branches. A weight displacing the forest floor somewhere unseen. And then the tree bombs started. One after another. Clusters of snow dropped from the canopy. Some near, some far. Like distant drums pounding in the hills. Each one louder than the last, until the air itself seemed to vibrate under their rhythm. The world turned white in shadow all at once, the ground disappearing in bursts of weightless ice dust. It didn't come down evenly. It came like a wall. Orin dropped to a knee, instinct more than thought, his body remembering avalanches, remembering thunder cracks in mountains where voices don't echo right. He covered his face with one arm, the other pressed against the snow for balance. But through it all, he listened, boots scrambling, a muffled scream, then silence. The kind that only comes when everyone left has stopped running. Not because they escaped, but because they understood there was nowhere else to go. When the air cleared, he looked up. She was still there, still standing. But now her body leaned slightly, forward, just enough to shield him, like a fortress made of breath and fur and centuries. She looked down at him once more. Her gaze held no fear, no anger, only precision. Then she moved, not toward the trees, toward him, each step measured, each motion careful. Her breath curled in front of her like smoke from an old hearth. Her eyes met his again, closer now. The steam from her mouth mixed with his as he exhaled, their warmth nodding in midair. He didn't speak, neither did she. But something passed between them. She lowered her head. Not a bow, not submission. Something older. A gesture that didn't belong to humans but spoke to something even older inside them. She leaned close. So close he could see the individual fibers in her coat, thick and ice-matted near the shoulder where the old wire had once dug in. He saw the scar now. It ran across her collarbone, barely healed, the skin underneath pale and raw. She opened her mouth and pressed her teeth to the rope still dangling from his wrist. Not biting, not pulling, just letting him know she could, and didn't. Then, with a small, controlled motion, she lifted the frayed end of the rope in her teeth and let it fall. The final strand of what had bound him. Gone. She stepped back. The forest behind her moved again. He saw it, just for a second shape, shorter, quieter. The child. Frostling. He stood barely visible through the trees, his coat darker now, thicker, with patches of new fur grown over the places that had once been raw. He didn't look scared. He didn't run. He just watched. Then another branch cracked high above, dumping snow again, only this time it fell in a clean line, like a curtain closing. By the time Orin looked back, the child was gone. So was she. And he was alone again, almost. Far off, the groan of an engine still trying to catch carried through the trees. Not steady, choking, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to start or die. He didn't chase it. Didn't need to. He knew who was behind the handlebars, and he knew they wouldn't come back the same. He turned slowly, the cold now finally starting to sting as the adrenaline faded. He checked his coat, adjusted the strap of his pack, glanced once more toward the edge of the corridor where spruce and birch formed natural columns like the bones of a forgotten cathedral. Then he walked, not away, just forward. Snow fell lightly now, but underfoot the powder wasn't soft anymore. It crunched, like footsteps had already passed there, and maybe they had. The forest wasn't loud that morning, not anymore. It didn't breathe heavy like it had days before. It held its breath in a different way now, calmer, more watchful, like it had been given back something it thought it lost. Or maybe forgiven. Orin didn't try to make sense of it, not with words. He wasn't built like that, but he could feel it, underfoot, in the snow that crunched differently now, less like resistance and more like memory. He walked slowly, not because of the pain. It was there, sure, woven deep into the tendons of his knees and the bruised muscle along his shoulder, but because speed didn't feel right. This wasn't a place you rushed through, not anymore. It felt like sacred ground now, and the snow held on to things like a cathedral would. Sound, footprints, scent, sorrow. You stepped quiet. You watched how the light moved through the needles, and they were waiting for him. He saw her first, the northern mother, standing just inside the shadow line of the old ridge. Snow dusted across her shoulders, face turned to him like she'd expected him all along. She didn't move, just watched. Then her head shifted slightly, almost like a nod, and she stepped aside. There he was, Frostling, still smaller than she, still limping slightly, but upright now, alert, stronger. His coat had thickened, darkened at the chest, eyes brighter. They met Orin's for a long moment, no fear in them. Just something open, something alive. Orin stepped forward. Not close, just enough. He reached into his coat and pulled out what he'd carried for the last mile without letting the wind touch it. A small piece of wood, worn smooth, carved into the shape of snowshoes. It wasn't much. It wasn't magic. Just an old charm whittled by someone who'd once believed things could be protected, even when they couldn't. He held it for a beat, then set it down, right at the base of a stone outcrop overlooking the hollow, pressed firm into the snow. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The mother moved again, slowly. She stepped forward, lifted something from the crook of her arm. A branch of spruce, long, dark, still wet at the base where it had been freshly torn from tree. She turned it gently in her hand once, then leaned down and drove it into the snow beside the charm, upside down. The needles shook once, then stilled. Neither of them moved for a long time. Snow started to fall again, light this time, feathered and slow. No wind. Orin stood there for a moment more, staring at the two objects in the snow. One from his world, one from theirs, side by side, not buried, not broken, just placed. Then something brushed his coat. He looked down. Frostling had stepped closer. Close enough that Orin could see the small scar that still curved under the fur at his collarbone. Close enough that he could hear his breath. Steady now. Curious. For just a second, the creature leaned his forehead forward. Not a headbutt. Not contact. Just near enough for Orin to feel the warmth pass between them. And then he stepped back again. Orin didn't chase the moment. He just nodded once, and turned. The walk back wasn't heavy. It wasn't light either. Just enough to hold his thoughts in place. His boots left a straight line through the powder. Behind him, no one followed. But he didn't feel alone. Not really. Near the edge of the trail, a breeze cut through from the south, scattering loose flakes across the ground. It whispered through the trees like a voice too old to form words. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the compass Tice had kicked into the snow before it got dark, brushed off what frost still clung to it. The glass was cracked, but the needle still turned. He wiped it clean and pocketed it again. He didn't need it to find his way back. But it felt right to carry it. Halfway down the ridge, he paused again. Not because he was tired, but because he felt something shift behind him. No sound, no shape, just a breath of air. He turned his head. Nothing there. But from somewhere behind the trees, 3 soft knocks echoed through the trunks. Even, rhythmic, faint. He closed his eyes. He didn't smile. Not exactly, just breathed a little deeper. A little easier. By the time he reached the cabin, the wind had died. The sky was a dull gray, not angry anymore. Just watching. He stepped up to the porch, boots knocking snow loose at the heel, then paused at the door. Reached into his satchel, pulled out the old leather string, tied to it a carving. Cedar, weathered. 2 snowshoes crossed. He pressed a small tack into the wood above the threshold and hung it there. Not as a warning, not as a welcome, just as a promise. He stepped inside without lighting the lamp, let the dark take shape around him, sat at the table, waited, let the room breathe. And in that silence, behind him, just beyond the reach of the window frame, the tracks of man and creature still crossed beneath the snow, then parted, each finding their own way home. The cabin creaked softly in the wind, the old wood swelling and shrinking with the cold. Inside, the fire had burned low, just a thin red line pulsing inside the belly of the stove. Orin sat alone at the table, a mug of half-cold tea cupped in both hands, untouched. The logs in the hearth didn't pop anymore. They only sighed. It had been 3 days. 3 mornings since he'd come back down off the ridge. 3 nights since the forest had offered him that final silence. The kind that doesn't ask questions, doesn't promise answers, just holds space. The first thing he did when he returned was open his notebook. Not the logbook the service issued, but the real one. The brown leather one he kept wrapped in an oilcloth under the floorboard. The one with the faded drawing his son made tucked between the pages. He opened it and wrote a single line, "Small mercies paid forward." Then he closed it. He didn't need to write more. The words weren't for the world. They were for the part of himself that had carried the weight of a debt no one else saw. For the man who used to wake at 3 a.m. with cold sweat on his chest, and a name he hadn't said in years stuck to the roof of his mouth. That man still lived here. But tonight, he sat quieter, breathing easier. Orin stood and stepped to the door, opened it. The wind met him, not like a slap, not like a dare, but like a hand held out. A little sharp around the edges, maybe, but honest. He stepped out barefoot just for a second, letting the snow press into the soles of his feet like a kind of penance. Then he turned and looked up. Above the doorway, the small carving of the snowshoes still hung, swinging slightly in the breeze. Beneath it, nailed into the wood in the last light of dusk, hung a second shape. A small spruce branch, turned upside down, the needles now brittle with time but still holding. He let his fingers brush against it, then let go. The snow drifted lazily now, not falling hard, just reminding everything it was still winter. The kind of night where sound carried far and breath seemed to last longer. Somewhere deep in the trees, a single owl called once. Then nothing. Orin turned back inside. He pulled the old topo maps from the drawer again. The ones with the red marks, the ringed trees, the warnings. He spread them on the table and studied them for a long while. Then he reached for a pencil, not to draw more traps, but to cross them out, one by one. He marked the place where the cables had been cut, drew a line through the old snow-blind corridor, circled the rock where she had placed the branch, all of it, not to forget, but to make sure it stayed seen. Then he folded the map into a new shape, an envelope. He sealed it with wax. No return address. The next morning he took the truck into town, left the envelope at the ranger station mailbox. It didn't say much, just coordinates, dates, and the words, "Check what's yours, not what isn't." No mention of what he'd seen. He didn't need to lie. He just didn't know the truth to everyone. That night he returned to the cabin, lit the lamp, then turned it off, let the dark settle like it had earned the right to stay. Out in the snow, the wind moved again. 3 soft knocks tapped against the base of the back wall. Not the front door this time. Not the windows. Just the siding. Like someone checking in, or maybe saying goodbye. He didn't get up. Didn't chase it. Just let it pass. The hours moved slowly after that. He sat at the fire. No book, no music. Just the sound of logs settling and the crackle of pitch catching flame. His fingers tapped against the mug on instinct. He thought about the boy, the creature. Frostling. He wondered if he was still watching, still learning, still healing. And he hoped someone was showing him how to rest. Outside, the snow picked up again, but not a blizzard, not a warning. Just snow, just the kind that fell soft and full, blanketing the world like a hush over a story almost finished. Almost. By morning, the ground was clean again. No footprints, no blood, no chaos. But just before the edge of the tree line, where the path met the riverbank and the current sometimes whispered under the ice, something stood out, a single spruce branch, planted upside down in a perfect patch of undisturbed snow. No other sign around it, just the branch, and the silence that agreed with it. Orin didn't touch it, didn't go near. He saw it from the porch. Let the morning sun catch the tips of the needles. Let it be what it was. A gesture, an answer. He stepped back into the house, closed the door, and this time when the wind blew, it didn't rattle the windows. It bowed, quietly, and moved on. Sometimes, the quietest stories leave the deepest marks, not because they shout or fight to be remembered, but because they echo with something we've all felt. Loss, grace, fear, and the aching pull to make things right. In the coldest corners of the world, where the line between man and wilderness begins to blur, we are reminded that the bonds we forge, whether across species, silence, or sorrow, are often stronger than the ones written in blood or law. There's something sacred in the act of mercy, not the grand, showy kind that seeks recognition, but the small, quiet offerings that ask for nothing in return. A rope cut loose, a child sheltered, a branch placed gently in the snow. These gestures don't rewrite history. They don't undo the damage or erase the pain. But they say, I see you, I choose not to harm you. And sometimes that's the first step toward healing the wound we never knew we were carrying. What we fear in the dark is often just a reflection of what we refuse to understand. And when we stop reaching for the rifle, for the trap, for the last word, we might find something looking back at us with the same caution, the same wonder, the same bruised hope. The forest doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in presence, in stillness, in what it returns when we give it our trust. And maybe the most important thing we can do is listen. Really listen. Not just with our ears, but with what remains of our better instincts. Because sometimes the greatest acts of connection aren't loud. They're just remembered. So if this story left a mark on you, if it made you pause, made you breathe deeper, made you look out the window a little longer into the trees, we'd love to know. Leave us your thoughts below. Share the part that stayed with you. And if you believe the world still has room for kindness, for redemption, for stories that matter, go ahead and subscribe. Follow the journey and help us keep that fire burning. Thank you for being here. You're not alone.